Welcome everyone to the ICFJ Dow Jones Webinar on Cross-Border Data Journalism. My name is Marie Von Hoften, and I am a program officer supporting ICFJ Knight Fellows as they work to instill a culture of news innovation and experimentation worldwide. I'm here today with one of our ICFJ Knight Fellows, Jacopo Ottaviani. Jacopo spearheads data journalism story production and engagement strategies with our partner Code for Africa. He works for local news organizations and organizes community events that foster collaboration between technologists and journalists. Jacopo is here today to speak with us about managing cross-border data journalism projects involving large networks of journalists and potentially spanning multiple time zones as well. Jacopo, are you ready to get started?
I am, thank you. Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mary, for the introduction. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar. I'm going to start the slides so that we can get things started. So I'll share the screen now. Just give me 1 sec. All right. So welcome again, everyone. This webinar is about cross-border data journalism, and I'm going to go through all the tools and strategies that Code for Africa, and in particular the data journalism team at Code for Africa, is using to best manage a distributed team of researchers, designers, developers, and journalists who are working together from multiple countries to run interesting data journalism projects. So first of all, what's Code for Africa? So Code for Africa is an impact accelerator working in 9 countries in Africa, such as Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, Uganda, Sierra Leone, and South Africa, and many others. We work on a number of programs. For example, we have a data journalism program that is experimenting a lot of new methods to run, new transnational projects on topics such as health, such as development, education, and many others. So the challenge is to coordinate a lot of journalists sitting across the continent and beyond, because we have collaborators also in other continents. But that's possible because of the internet, basically. So how do we do that? And what do we do? So we set up an international data team, which is fully fledged. Basically, it's a multidisciplinary team of journalists, researchers, designers, developers, project managers, and these guys are now working from all the countries I mentioned before. And it's quite challenging to coordinate all the moving parts and to join forces on a daily basis to produce impactful projects. So this international team is basically working on interactive news applications. You can imagine interactive maps, charts, open data portals, interactive mobile applications. We are also training journalists to learn how to do all the things we do. And this is something that we are constantly doing every day. And you can imagine that our lives are like connected to this international team every day through the tools that I'm going to show you. But first of all, I want to spend a couple of words on data wrangling. So our data team basically includes data analysts and digital designers who are now trying to facilitate the communication of large data sets and to create impactful stories using these data sets. So we're not just creating infographics, but we are creating actionable data tools that can be used by citizens, by journalists, by civic activists, by anyone who have a mobile phone to connect to the internet and start using them for free. So how is the team structured? So we have about 30 people at Code for Africa who are full-time staff members. We have several teams. The team I coordinate is the data team, and that team includes 8 people at the moment, including myself. As I said, these 8 people, actually the entire team at Code for Africa, sits in 5 or even more countries, and we work in 3 different time zones. So you can imagine all the challenges to coordinate these people. To do that, you can actually get inspired by the Agile methodology, which is a methodology that was started, I think, in the West Bay area in San Francisco, where all the startups are working. And they're used to work from remote with teams that are sitting all across the United States. So we are kind of using the same methodology to coordinate all the processes and the tasks across the continent and beyond. That's called Agile methodology. The tools we use to do that. So at the moment, I think the 3 main tools we're using to coordinate all these people are Slack, Trello, and Google Drive. All these tools are at least freely available to try. We are using them every day, and most of our work gets developed through these tools. I'm sure that almost everyone knows Google Drive. Google Drive is basically like Microsoft Office, but it's online, and you can collaboratively work on documents, spreadsheets, slides. It's, I think, a very common tool at the moment. We're using that all the time. The other tool we use is Slack, which is our virtual office. I have a couple of screenshots later, and I'll show you. So Slack is actually a sort of virtual office, meaning that it has channels on projects where teams can share files and knowledge, exchange information, have phone calls, video calls, and all sorts of things that you can need when you are developing, transnational projects. And you're not sitting all together into one room, but you're actually sitting in several countries simultaneously. So Google Drive, Slack, and Trello. Trello is the project management tool that we are now using to keep track of our priorities, to sort of calibrate the workload on every single individual and team, and to share information across teams. Because Code for Africa, for example, has also a tech team that interacts with the data team. The tech team is sitting in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. And the data team is constantly in touch with the tech team to create interactive applications. We also have other teams that are in other countries, but all teams are on Slack. And all teams are using Google Drive and Trello to coordinate all these moving parts. So that's our toolbox. How do we work? So since we are not all together into one room, we are agreeing on several devices. We use several devices to facilitate our coordination. So one of these devices is called the daily stand-up. That means that every person in a team or a specific person in a team will share a short, very, very short, brief stand-up text every morning around 10 a.m. explaining what's the plan for the day and explaining what's been done until that day or the day before, and also raising questions for other team members. This can be done on a daily basis, but also on a weekly basis, depending on the nature of the projects. We also have weekly video conferences or calls to catch up on everything. So, for example, the data team meets every week on Wednesdays, and we find the right time zone, actually the right time slot that works for all time zones. And we have a video call, exchanging information, catching up on all the tasks, and just spending time with the team. That's the weekly call. We also have something called retrospective analysis. So let's say that we are launching a big project on water security in East Africa. This project involves a number of people You can imagine at least normally 8 or 9 people working on that project, excluding the external partners. So in the end, we probably have an interaction between 12 or even 15 people. This creates a lot of complexity, meaning that every time we launch a project, we learn something. And it's always a good idea to have a retrospective analysis of what worked well and what could be improved next time. So that's what we call retrospective analysis. But again, this is something that we are learning from the startup world. We're just getting inspired by them, and we are using that to improve our data journalism methodology and production. So we also have a water cooler channel where we basically have fun. That means that you have, a number of people sharing music, or having those conversations that you would have in front of a water cooler in an office. This is good for team building, right? That said, we work on Slack all the time, but we try also to meet in person on a regular basis. Some people manage to meet with others like more than 3 or 4 times per year. And that's very important because, when you spend time in person, you can have, you can strengthen the relationship with the rest of the team, and it's very inspiring. So we also do that. This is Slack. So that's how Slack looks like. I'm sure that many people here know it. But on the left side, you have a bar with all the channels, and on the right part of the screen, here you see the chat room. You have public and private channels. You can share files. You can share any sort of calendar meeting. You can kickstart a call on Slack. It's a fully fledged office, and I highly recommend that as a solution to work with this sort of teams. This is how a stand-up session looks like. You see here, this is taken actually from one of our stand-up channels. We explain what every single individual did last week. In this case, it's a weekly stand-up, so that's why you see that it's on a weekly basis. So what I did last week, and then a bullet points list with all the items, and then what I'm planning to do this week, and then do I envision any blockers or not? In that case, you can share a question, or you can raise a concern on that section of the stand-up. And if you have questions, you can drop them and tag your colleague on that, so that you can get problem solved when you start your week. And then finally, Trello. Trello is we can define it as a shared dashboard digital system platform that you can use to share lists and tasks with your team and within your team. And we are using the Kanban method, which comes from Japan. It doesn't come from the media industry. It doesn't come from the startup industry, but it comes from the, I think, cars industry. Basically, to make work more efficient, you can create 3 lists. The first list is with a to-do list, so what the team should be working on in the future. The list in between the other 2 lists is the doing list, and that's where teams can drop their tasks they are working on, and they can even tag the single individuals who are working on that task, so that everyone is on the same page, regardless the place they work from. And finally, the third list is the done list, meaning that once a task is complete, can be moved into the done list, so that everyone knows that a task is completed. You can add a 4th list between doing and done, which is review, and that's where the team leader can actually vet the quality of the outputs that are being produced by the team. But that's optional. So this kind of dashboard It's called Kanban dashboard or Kanban method. There is a lot of literature online. You just Google that name and you can find loads and loads of interesting documents. All right, so, but we're not just creating projects. What we are trying to do, we are trying to introduce this culture into newsrooms. And for example, a project for us could even be the creation of a data journalism desk in a Nigerian newspaper, for example. That's what we're doing at The Guardian in Nigeria, for example. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to change cultures. We're trying to innovate journalism and also trigger an organizational change to change workplaces. This is actually something that has a longer lasting change and impact. It's not just a one-off publication, but it's actually a structural change. I have a case study here for you guys because I think that so far I've been talking about theory, and it's good to see a real project, and I can actually spend some time explaining how we made it. And that said, I mean, if you have questions, we have also a Q&A session later, right after my presentation. So feel free to ask me questions later. So the project that I've chosen to present is called Gender Gap Africa. We can say that it's the first cross-African data journalism project on gender gap. And it's available online on gendergap.africa if you want to see it. So this is how it looks like. It is basically an interactive tool that enables African women to estimate the gender pay gap in their own country. It is a calculator that can be used from your computer or from a mobile app, from your mobile browser. And you can type in your country, your salary, and then based on the World Economic Forum's gender gap report, it will estimate how much money you would make if you were a man. Or if you're a man using the tool, you would see how much money you would make if you were a woman, on average. So this project is quite large, meaning that it included a coalition of 4 media outlets. I've mentioned them here on this slide. You can see the Citizens in Tanzania, The Guardian in Nigeria, City Press in South Africa, Elephant in Kenya, and there are others in the pipeline that will be introduced soon. So what I want to say here is that the 4 media outlets joined the coalition and decided to use the tool that Code for Africa built to raise awareness around the gender gap. So the media coalition is something that included 12 or more female data journalists and generated 30 stories that are all available on stories.gendergap.africa and generated a lot of fuzz and on Facebook, on Twitter, and combined about 4 million views online. So it is quite an impactful project. It's available online if you want to try it out. And we also collected all the stories into a section of the website, which is stories.gendergap.africa. So this project was the result of that kind of multidisciplinary team that I mentioned before. We had researchers, we had designers, we had developers, we had journalists joining forces and working together to build an interactive tool and a media campaign on gender gap. Gender gap is just one of the topics that we cover. We have a number of other projects that are all available on our website, on our social media. So you feel free to have a look at that, and then you can connect with me if you want to know more. I can mention another project called InfoNile. It is a geojournalism open data platform on water security in East Africa. in particular in the Nile Basin region. So we are helping at Code for Africa. We are helping a team, InfoNile's team, to strengthen their platform with a new design, with some seed funds, and the project is growing. And also I want to mention that this project was inspired by Info Amazonia, which is a project kickstarted by another ICFJ Knight fellow, Gustavo Faleiros. And the idea here is that all the tools that we create can be replicated in other countries because we are following the open source philosophy. And we are, trying to be transparent and share our methodology, including our products, meaning that almost everything we do is open source, and we try, to trigger impact all across the globe. So yeah, I think I can thank you, and I'm ready for the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jacopo. That was wonderful. And we do have time for questions. If you have a question, you can submit it here on Zoom. There should be a Q&A button at the top left of your screen. Or if you're watching through the Facebook Live, you can put your question into the comments section. We'll make sure that Jacopo sees it. So I was thinking our top question so far is about starting these collaborative projects. So if I'm a data journalist who's working in my country, how can I find people to collaborate with or begin making those connections?
All right. So thanks for the question. I think it's a very important question, and I'm happy that I can suggest a couple of solutions. I think there are so many resources online now to connect with other journalists. I can think of IJNet, for example, or I can think of, social media. So if you want to connect with other data journalism, you can, for example, search for hashtag DDJ. So DDJ stands for data-driven journalism. And there are data journalists from all across the globe using that hashtag to share their contacts or their stories and their resources. So Twitter could be a way to do that. IJNet is doing an amazing job giving visibility to a lot of data journalists from all over the world. So you can keep an eye on IJNet. You can connect with other media organizations. I can think of the EJC, the European Journalism Center. You can connect with a lot of other initiatives. Code for Africa in Africa has a very large network, and we're very open to share our contacts and to connect you with the right people. Other ways to connect with other journalists could be conferences. So if you have a chance, you can apply to fly to a conference and meet them in person. Okay.
Another question is coming in about the trial and error that you've faced doing cross-border data journalism projects. Any things that you've learned through the process so far?
So absolutely. I learned, for example, that it's very important to have a clear structure, meaning that the team should be well designed to face the challenge of a project. That means that team should have one person responsible for coordination, because these projects involve a lot of moving parts. So if you just let it go, it could be quite chaotic. So having a clear structure internally can be very helpful. Then I think every single discipline has a different process for improvement. For example, I can think of data visualization. Data visualization is a particular discipline that requires elements of design, elements of data science, statistics. So what I suggest is to create an expertise across the team that covers and touches on all these disciplines. Yeah. Okay, next question. can you explain about the agile methodology? Absolutely. So the agile methodology, for the way we are trying to use it, is something that comes from the tech world. We are trying to apply that into, our organization, which works in intersection between tech and media. So how does that work? That works with normally with a number of methods. I mentioned the stand-up. So that's when the team member drops on a channel his or her plans for the day or for the week. Then you have sprints. Another device is a sprint. So that's when the team join forces to focus on one single problem and try to solve it in a collective way. We have retrospective analysis. The retrospective analysis is the process you use to analyze the problems that were emerging during the production of a large project. And you usually have that kind of session right after the launch of a new project, so that you can actually share your ideas and your suggestions with the team, and have also, you can analyze the problems that you faced and share them with the others, so that you can strengthen the methodology for the future. I'm going to move on to the next question. How do you coordinate publishing across multiple media outlets? Right. That's a good question. You don't want to create problems with your partners. That means that you try to design a coalition that works without generating, problems in terms of competition, in terms of exclusivity. Media partners are very happy to join a coalition as long as the audiences are not overlapping. So with the Gender Gap project, we put together 4 media outlets, but these 4 media outlets work in 4 different countries. So they were very happy to publish the tool and the stories in their country, and then join a coalition that would create a larger impact. Okay. Next question is, how can we keep ethics intact while dealing with data? Because this is an excellent question. It's very important to bear in mind that data can be manipulated. Data sets are like images. They can be doctored, they can be manipulated, they can be used to, to run a propaganda campaign. So it's very important that we keep a critical eye on our data sets, and that we cross-check our sources, and we check all the facts that we are reporting on. So it's very important to read the methodology behind the data set we are using. That's usually published along with the dataset. It's also very important to see who produced that dataset and do some research on the authors. Next question, how do you collect data and what tools do you use to analyze data? All right, so how do we collect data? We use Google a lot. And to use Google, we tend to use the Google advanced search features and functionalities, meaning that you can use some special syntax on Google to filter the right results. For example, file types, or you can use the plus to include one word or a minus to exclude another word as you type your Google searches. Google Scholar is another excellent source for academic papers, and academic papers are full of data. So it's an amazing way to search for data sets. And then you have a lot of institutions publishing like an enormous amount of data. I can think of the UN, I can think of World Bank, and many others. So also the institutes of statistics of all countries, well, not all countries, but some countries, I would say perhaps most countries at the moment are publishing data online on their website. So I think that's a good start. Next question is about how do you finance these cross-border projects? It really depends. A way to do that is to rely on grants. Media NGOs all over the world are opening calls for applications. I can think of the Impact Africa program by Code for Africa. I can think of the Journalism Grants program by the EJC. And there are many others. There is the International Women Fund for media. That's also another fund. And they try to provide financial grants for journalists all across the globe. Otherwise, there are two other ways to do that. One is crowdfunding, but you need a strong community. And the other way is to try to create a coalition of media, and every media outlet will put an amount of money to finance your story or your series of stories. Okay, I'm not seeing any other question, so I guess we're good. Thank you so much for sharing your questions. And ICFJ and Mary will share my contacts, I think. So you can actually find me online on Twitter, or just feel free to mail me later if you have any question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacopo, for leading this webinar, and to Dow Jones and ICFJ for their support, and to all of you for tuning in. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your questions and ideas. And if you have more, like Jacopo said, you can find him on Twitter. You can also find ICFJ on Twitter as well. And we would love to know how this webinar has helped you. If you implement any ideas, you start any cross-border projects, we'd love to hear about it. So thank you again to Jacopo, and with that, the webinar is concluded. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.